Most injuries end a career. This one almost ended a life. March 22nd, 1989. More than 14,000 people watched a man bleed across the ice. Clint Malarchuk didn't flinch. He never flinched.
I don't want her to see her son die on the ice.
That was the problem. The wound on his neck took 300 stitches to close. The wound nobody saw took 19 years to find him.
I shot myself.
Before we go back to that Wednesday night in Buffalo, you need to understand the man inside the pads. Because everything that happened next, on the ice and off of it, comes straight from who Clint Malarchuk was raised to be. He was born in Grand Prairie, Alberta in 1961, where winter lasts half the year and toughness isn't a personality trait. It's a requirement. He was raised in Edmonton, and by the time most kids were learning to ride a bike, Clint was already on skates. Hockey wasn't a hobby in his house. But hockey wasn't the only thing that shaped him. In the off-seasons, while other NHL players were golfing or training in air-conditioned gyms, Clint was on a ranch. He worked with horses. He broke them, rode them, and lived around them. He worked with the Calgary rodeo circuit. Teammates started calling him the cowboy goalie, and the name stuck because it wasn't a gimmick. It was who he actually was. And cowboys don't flinch. That philosophy followed him into every crease he ever stood in. Quebec Nordiques, Washington Capitals. He played hurt. He played through things other goalies wouldn't have dressed for. In a sport built around hiding weakness, Clint didn't just hide it. He refused to admit it existed. On March 6, 1989, the Washington Capitals traded him to the Buffalo Sabres. He moved to Buffalo and walked into a new locker room with a new jersey and a new set of expectations. He was 27 years old. He was entering his prime, and he was 16 days away from the worst moment of his life. But here's what matters. His entire identity, the cowboy, the goalie, the professional, it was built on a single rule. You grind through it. You don't talk about it. That rule was about to save his life, and then, over the next 2 decades, try to end it. Wednesday night, Buffalo Memorial Auditorium. The odd. 14,448 fans in the seats for a regular season game against the St. Louis Blues. Nothing about the night felt historic. It was Clint's 6th game in a Sabres uniform. In his memoir, he described the minutes before the puck dropped, sitting alone in the locker room, staring at the floor, running saves in his head, pad, glove, breakaway. A ritual before every game. He opened the book with a single line about that night. The first time I should have died was a Wednesday, March 22nd, 1989. 4 minutes and 33 seconds remaining in the first period. A 2-on-2 rush comes down the ice. Blues forward Rick Meyer sends a pass across the slot toward his teammate Steve Tuttle. Sabres defenseman Huey Krupp hooks Tuttle from behind. Both men lose their balance at full speed and crash into the net, into the crease, into Clint. The net comes off its moorings. The referee's whistle is already in the air. It's a collision hockey fans have seen 1,000 times. Except this one is different, because as Tuttle goes down, his right skate kicks up and the blade catches the right side of Clint's neck. The cut is 6 inches long, clean through the carotid artery. The jugular vein was partially severed. Blood starts pouring onto the ice almost before Clint understands what's happened.
It was a reflex for me to flinch out of the way, exposing my neck, but I didn't know my neck was cut.
He reaches for his neck. He rips his mask off, and the arena goes silent. Then the screaming starts. Inside the odd, 11 fans faint in the stands. 2 people suffer heart attacks watching it happen. 3 players on the ice vomit. Sabres defenseman Grant Ledyard, who had been traded to Buffalo alongside Clint just 16 days earlier, breaks away from the bench and starts pounding on the glass behind the net, screaming for help. In the broadcast booth, color commentator Mike Robitaille is crying on air. The local TV station cuts the feed to a commercial, but somebody is already moving. Jim Pizzatelli, Sabres athletic trainer. The team called him Pizza. He was 39 years old. He'd been with the organization for 9 years. And 19 years before that night, in 1970, a draft notice had pulled him out of his freshman year in college and sent him to Vietnam. He served a 13-month tour as a combat engineer. His platoon destroyed bridges used by the North Vietnamese army. They also had one assigned medic per 20 men, and when that medic wasn't available, Pizzatelli stepped in. He'd seen wounds like this before. Not on ice, in the jungle. He'd learned, in the worst classroom on Earth, that you don't freeze, you move. He sprinted across the ice. He reached into the open wound and pinched the severed artery shut with his bare hands. Clint was still conscious, and his first thought wasn't the pain or the blood or the thousands of people watching him die. It was his mother. She was watching the game on satellite television in Calgary. He turned to the Sabres equipment manager, a man named Robert Simonik, and he said 6 words: "Hold my hand while I die." Then he asked for a priest. Pizzatelli did not let go of that artery. Not when they got Clint off the ice, not when they moved him down the tunnel. Not until they laid him on a table in the training room and a doctor took over. Then Pizzatelli knelt on Clint's collarbone to slow his heart rate and buy more time. Here is the detail that decided everything. The collision had happened near the Zamboni entrance. Clint was just steps from the door leading to the training room. Doctors said later that if the wound had happened at the far end of the rink, the extra seconds would have killed him. He lost 1.5 liters of blood, almost a third of the blood in his body. It took 300 stitches to close the wound. And 10 days later, Clint Malarchuk walked back into an NHL net and started a hockey game. The hockey world called it a miracle. The NHL changed its equipment rules. Reporters wrote features. Clint did interviews, smiled, and told everyone he was fine. Nobody offered him counseling. Nobody asked how he was sleeping. In his own words, years later, none was provided. I didn't think of it back then, nor did they. In 1989, in a professional hockey locker room, there wasn't a vocabulary for what was happening to him. His phrase for it, PTSD, wasn't even a word. And this is where the toughness that had built his entire life turned against him. Because Clint had one response to suffering. The same one his father had, his grandfather had, every cowboy he'd ever ridden with had. Cowboy up. You swallow it. You get back on the horse.
I was brought up with a cowboy mentality. You get bucked off a horse, you get right back on. Face the fear as quick as you can.
The problem is that some wounds don't heal when you ignore them. They just learn to wait. The symptoms started the next season. Depression came first, then panic attacks that arrived without warning, in locker rooms, in hotels, in the middle of games, then the nightmares. And the nightmares were specific. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. A skate blade is coming up toward his throat. He stopped lying down to sleep. He started sleeping sitting upright in a chair. In his own words, I'd sit straight up in a chair so I wouldn't go into a deep sleep, so I wouldn't visualize in a dream the flashback of that skate coming up and cutting my jugular vein. There were stretches when he went 10 days without real sleep. A human being cannot function for 10 days without sleep, so he found something else that could knock him out: alcohol.
I was up to 30 beers a day.
His career wound down. He moved through organizations. He left the NHL in 1992. The hockey stopped, but the skate blade in his mind never did. For years, he carried it alone. He met a woman named Joni, and they married in 2006. She married him, not knowing any of this, because Clint Malarchuk did not talk about it. And then, on February 10th, 2008, a forward for the Florida Panthers named Richard Zednick took a skate blade to the neck in almost an identical injury. External carotid artery cut, blood across the ice. And the game, by pure coincidence, was being played in Buffalo. Clint refused to watch the footage. For days, he refused. Then, he watched it. And 19 years of buried trauma cracked open at once. October 7th, 2008, Clint's ranch in Fish Springs, Nevada. He's been drinking. He's behind the horse barn with a .22 caliber rifle shooting at targets. When his wife Joni comes home, she finds him out there and she can see something is wrong. He tells her the thoughts won't stop. He picks up the rifle. He says 5 words to her. This is what I wish would happen.
I just want to turn it off.
Gun was laying on a kind of a stool in front of me.
And I pulled that trigger.
He puts the barrel under his chin and pulls the trigger. He thought the gun was empty. The bullet enters through his chin. It passes through the roof of his mouth. It splits his tongue. It knocks out a tooth. And then it lodges in his sinus cavity just below his forehead, missing his brain and his eyes by millimeters. It's still there today. The bullet was never removed. Years later, he put it in a single sentence. I went 20 years with undiagnosed PTSD that almost ended my life 20 years later. He survived the second shot to his throat the same way he survived the first. Barely. They flew him to a hospital in Reno. When he was stable, they moved him into a rehab facility and he stayed there for 6 months. Not because of the physical wounds, because of everything underneath it. Alcoholism, obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression. And for the first time, at 47, a doctor said the word nobody had said in 1989. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
I was insulted.
In his own words, that's when I started to heal. Acceptance of my disorder was the first step.
Finally accepting that I had PTSD, that was the first step of getting well.
In 2014, he published a memoir. In Canada, it was called The Crazy Game. In the United States, it was released under the title A Matter of Inches. He wrote it with a journalist named Dan Robson. It became a bestseller. ESPN made a 30 for 30 documentary about his life and called it Cutthroat. But the book wasn't the point. The book was the beginning. Clint started speaking publicly, about 30 events a year, corporate audiences, high schools, colleges, and 2 groups in particular kept showing up on his calendar: military veterans and first responders. The men and women who do jobs where the culture still teaches you to absorb trauma without flinching. The same culture that almost killed him. There is something quiet and full circle about that choice. The man who saved Clint's life on the ice was a Vietnam combat engineer who had learned about arterial wounds the hard way, a long time before he ever worked in a hockey rink. Pizzatelli's war gave Clint 19 more years of his life. One Vietnam vet saved Clint's body in 1989. Clint now spends his life trying to save the minds of men like him. And Clint spends those years walking into rooms full of soldiers and cops and paramedics, telling them what nobody told him in 1989, that silence is not strength. You're allowed to ask. Here's how he explains it now. It doesn't matter how tough you are. It can hit any person, any walk of life. You could be the toughest SOB walking the earth. It's not a weakness, it's a sickness. And in every talk he gives, somewhere near the end, he says a version of the same line. The line that explains why a cowboy from Grand Prairie, Alberta, who should have died twice and somehow didn't, keeps standing up in front of strangers to talk about the hardest years of his life. I've been in the darkest of dark, suffering in silence. I want people to know they're not alone. Here's what I want you to know. If you'd been in that arena that night, do you think you could have kept watching? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story moved you, a super thanks goes a long way in helping the channel keep telling ones just like it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There's plenty more where that came from.